Dan Brister.
Thank you, Aaron. Well, I'm going to go right ahead and bring the buffalo into the room. So I'm talking tonight about the Yellowstone population, which is our country's only continuously wild population of buffalo or bison. I call them both. But Yellowstone, back in the days when there were 30 million buffalo, Yellowstone's the only place where there's been an uninterrupted history of them being wild. And I know you're not supposed to distract with slides when you're talking, but I think it's always important that people see and experience for themselves the animals that we're talking about. When they were all killed off back in the end of the 19th century, there were only about 25 individual buffalo that survived in Yellowstone National Park, and the 4,000 buffalo living today are their direct descendants. So it's a very special population in a very special place. They're both behaviorally unique in that, what I just said, they've always lived in the wild on their native habitat. And they're also genetically unique in that there are no cattle genes at all in those herds. Other public herds that we have in this country, they have detected cattle DNA. And in Yellowstone, they have not. So it's a very unique and special kind of herd. When one of the great joys of my life is getting to spend time out there in the presence of the buffalo and just learning great lessons from them. The way they walk single file together. A herd will come out in the deep snow, and if any of you have ever tried post-holing through snow, you know how hard that can be. And they really share the work. The one in the lead will break for a while, and then when that animal grows tired, he'll step to the side, and a new leader will go up, and then he'll wait till everyone goes and then walk in the easy path in the back. So just little things like that. You'll see in a little short video I'm going to show in a minute, but the hump that you see on their back is a huge, it's actually vertebrae that come up and support a huge muscle that they use to, it enables them to use their head almost as a big snow plow. And they just swipe it back and forth, and they can push, 4 feet of snow aside really quick and get to the grass below. And one thing we always see when they do that, maybe the next day or maybe later that afternoon, a group of elk will come in and start feeding in the area that the buffalo have plowed aside and eat the grass that's left down there. So, you'll see in one of these slides buffalo wallows where they get up on their back and kind of scratch their back and rub themselves in the dust and make a big dust cloud. And those wallows, in the days when there were millions on the plains, served as little micro ecosystems that would hold water and support life that wouldn't otherwise be supported out there. And they still do. You can still see in and around Yellowstone lots of those wallows. And they're just a very neat creature. And we're lucky we still have them. We really came about this close. Today there are about maybe 600,000 in the United States, but most of those are on ranches, and they're not in the wild like this population is. So after, over the course of the 20th century, after Yellowstone was established, the population, those 25 animals, really rebounded, and slowly over that whole century, they came back to where today there are 4,000. But in Montana, our livestock industry there, the real organized livestock industry, it's our number one industry, and they really have a negative view on wild bison. And in 1995, the livestock industry heavily lobbied our legislature, and they took management of this real special herd away from the Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and invested it with our Montana Department of Livestock. And those agents have, no wildlife training at all. Their job is to protect the economic interests of our livestock industry. So every time these majestic animals migrate, Yellowstone is a volcanic caldera. So it's quite a bit higher than all the surrounding lands. And when Congress established Yellowstone, it was basically a bunch of white guys in Washington, D.C. with a ruler on a map, and they just drew straight boundaries around it that don't reflect the ecosystem at all. And so all the species, all the ungulate species, every winter when the snow accumulates up on that high plateau, they have to migrate out to get to those lower elevation lands around the park. And all the other species are allowed to do that and to go out to valleys like Paradise Valley and the Madison Valley. But the buffalo are managed by our Department of Livestock, who basically has a management fence around the park. And they will, under the current management plan, they will manage them just by shooting them or by what's called hazing, where they come out and they push them with helicopters, ATVs, horseback, snowmobiles, and they just try to keep the buffalo back in the park. And that's basically forcing them to starve to death if you're not letting them come out and access their habitat. Their calving grounds also lie outside the park boundary, so every spring, regardless of the winter conditions, several hundred buffalo on the west side come out to an area called Horse Butte. And one of the hardest things going on right now, actually just today there was a big hazing operation, but this is calving season as well, so we see newborns that are being hazed 15 miles on their first day in the world sometimes, and we document broken legs and calves getting separated from their moms and all kinds of really tough things to witness. After that happened in 1995, when our legislature gave management to the Department of Livestock, is when most of these things started happening. And the winter of 96-97 was a really hard winter. We had normal snows going into January, and then there was a big thaw. It got to be like 50, 60 degrees, and all that snow just melted. And then when it got cold again, there was a layer of just ice that was about this thick right above the ground. So they would use that motion and sweep the snow aside, and then their noses would just come hard up against this layer of ice, and they couldn't get to the grass. So in record numbers, they migrated out of the park that winter. And that was the first full winter that the Department of Livestock had been in charge. So it was really kind of a perfect storm against the buffalo. And 1,100 buffalo got killed that year. That happened to be the year that I moved to Montana. And, I didn't even at the time know that we still had this population of bison that were still wild, that had always been wild. And I learned about it through that slaughter. Somebody at the university up there had a bulletin board, and they kept a tally. And the first time I think I saw it, it said, 300 buffalo have been killed in Yellowstone this winter, and then I saw it a week later, and it was like 500. And over the course of that winter, I watched it climb to 1,000, and it ended up at about 1,100 that year. And because of the harsh winter as well, about an equal number were killed just from the natural winter and winter kill. And going into that winter, the population was only, it was about 3,500, so more than half of the entire population was wiped out in about 3 months that winter. So a man named Mike Meese, who was a videographer for a group called Cold Mountain Cold Rivers, they kind of do video work to document different environmental and human rights causes. And they had been going to Yellowstone and filming some of this, and that winter they sent some of their video footage to different tribal members on the Great Plains, knowing that tribes have the ultimate deep connection with this species. And Rosalie Little Thunder, a Lakota elder, got a hold of the video and was just aghast at what she saw. So she organized a prayer ceremony up near Gardner, Montana for that spring, and came up. There was over 100 people there having a prayer, and the Department of Livestock was actually invited to attend the prayer in a gesture of openness. But they instead decided to come and kill 8 buffalo less than a mile away from the ceremony. And so the gunshots disrupted that ceremony, and Rosalie and some others went to investigate the shots. And those buffalo were kind of behind a fence on this field. And Rosalie, it was very important to her to go out and say a prayer for those animals and send them on to the next world in the proper way. But when she tried to cross that fence, the agents came up and said, no, no, this is private land. You'll get arrested if you come over here. And so she and some others were standing at the fence like in a dilemma about what to do. And her grandson, who was I think 5 or 6 at the time, as they were having this talk, he looked up at her and he said, "Grandma, how old do you have to be to get arrested?" And so Rosalie heard that, and she ducked through that fence and went out and said those prayers, and then she was arrested, and she compares that, them going and killing those buffalo to a murder in a church parking lot during the service. That's how she describes what took place. And Mike Meese, that videographer, he ended up going to the jail when she got out to interview her and get her, her story. And the two of them just got to talking, and they decided, that it was important to have a permanent presence on this Yellowstone boundary and document and witness and share with the world everything that's happening to those animals. So that was the spring of 1997 when the campaign, the Buffalo Field Campaign, was formed. And so I was in Missoula that bad winter and all that fall too, and I was like, buffalo? Why are they killing them? And I would go to the university and try to read everything I could, and I couldn't make sense of it. They were saying it was about this disease called brucellosis, but the disease had never been transmitted from a wild buffalo to cow. It's an original disease that comes from Europe with livestock, and elk also have this disease, and yet elk are allowed to come out of the park and come graze, in those lower elevation lands. And then when I first went to Yellowstone, I noticed that there aren't even any cattle in that area anyway, and so the more I learned about it, the less that brucellosis argument made any sense to me at all. So I ended up going to graduate school, and first I went and I volunteered for the campaign, and then I went to graduate school with my focus on the buffalo, and it was an interdisciplinary program, so I was able to study ecology and policy and history and Native American studies and law and different, but the buffalo was the center of it all, and my book ended up coming out of, sorry about the noise, my book ended up coming out of my studies at the university, and I ended up, going down there that December of '97. I was planning on going to volunteer for a week, and I ended up staying that whole winter. I got out of my lease in Missoula, and I was doing an internship with another environmental group, but I was like just in the office all the time, and I didn't feel a connection with the lands or the creatures that I was supposedly protecting. So when I went to West Yellowstone, I just immediately felt in my element. We were getting ready for the first winter of campaign, and I had done some carpentry work in the past, and my carpentry skills were immediately put to use building lofts in the cabin so we could house volunteers who were coming through. And then my writing skills, writing press releases, everything just seemed to fall in place. And that was now 17 years ago, and here I am still doing it. But I'm going to read a little bit about one of my first patrols out there. So let's see. I sat in my Missoula room in the wake of a news report on the slaughter of more than 1,000 Yellowstone buffalo. That afternoon, I started doing research and educating myself, trying to uncover the reason, if there was one, for the slaughter. I struggled to find sense in the actions of the Montana government. Buffalo were being killed at the insistence of the livestock industry because some of them carried a European disease that they originally contracted from cattle. Despite the fact that there was not a single documented case of wild bison transmitting this disease, buffalo leaving the park and entering Montana were being slaughtered to protect a few hundred Idaho cattle. Because the cattle are only in the area between June and October, a time when bison are usually deep within the park, there's no way in which they could transmit the disease. Elk also carry brucellosis, but they never raised the ire of the livestock industry. The following winter, I learned of a group of people running daily patrols from a rented cabin, intent on stopping the slaughter.
Armed with video cameras and direct action tactics, Buffalo Field Campaign volunteers were spending all of their days with buffalo, monitoring migrations out of the park and interfering with the DOL's slaughter operations. As soon as I could, I traveled to West Yellowstone to help them. Originally planning on a week-long visit, before the week was up, I revised my plans to spend the winter. Since that week in December of '97, I've worked with the campaign as a volunteer, media coordinator, member of the group's board of directors, and currently as executive director. In the intervening years, more than 4,000 volunteers from around the world have joined us. From them, I've learned a powerful lesson. Apathy is not omnipotent. One of the more challenging periods of our early years came in February and March of 1999, when more than 80 buffalo following Duck Creek out of the park stood poised on the boundary, sniffing hay that had been put out to lure them into a capture facility set up on private land adjacent to Yellowstone. Knowing the animals would be slaughtered if they followed their instincts out of the park, we determined to make a human shield between the hungry bison and the food they needed so badly. Dissuading a 2,000-pound bull from fresh hay is no easy task. Attempting to hold back 20 hungry bulls, 50 cows, and 10 calves is futile. For more than a month, we maintained around-the-clock patrols at Duck Creek, weighing the evil of starvation against the certain death of the cage. A debate arose among us, some feeling that our incessant presence was too intrusive and would erode the animal's wildness, while others argued that the alternative was far worse. This ideological divide between volunteers rears its head each winter, and depending on the situation, is usually resolved during our nightly meetings, when the next day's strategy is planned. In this case, consensus was reached without too much fuss. The baited bison trap right on the park boundary was a strong deterrent to let the buffalo pass. The midnight to sunrise shift at Duck Creek is savored by volunteers who enjoy hunkering through the night before the flicker of a small fire, taking warming ski trips to check on bedded bison, and watching the droplets of dawn wash darkness away. Sunrise is reason enough for me to brave those cold nights, although beauty on the western boundary is always tainted with the ever-present fear of capture and slaughter. The buffalo appear every fall, trickling from the park along the path of least resistance, following the drainages of Duck Creek, Cougar Creek, and the Madison River. When winter turns fierce and snow obscures the grass from which their bodies are built, bison pour out, migrating down the watercourses to lower elevations outside the park. Theirs is often a one-way migration, as they are killed when they follow their instincts into Montana. The DOL keeps the trap in the primary migration corridor between Yellowstone and the surrounding Gallatin National Forest. The trap, on land abutting the park boundary, sits less than a few hundred feet from Duck Creek. The land is owned by a man who leases it to DOL. He shares his house with the Department of Livestock agents, and they keep snowmobiles, tractors, and other equipment in his barn. He owns the property on both sides of the creek. Every winter, when snow begins to build up in the park, hundreds of buffalo migrate through his land on their way to the winter habitat on Horse Butte. He and the Department of Livestock entice hungry bison by placing bales of hay near the boundary. 4 days after I arrived at the cabin, I participated in an action and helped save 16 buffalo. A volunteer on his way home from work in town the night before had seen 2 DOL trucks pull into the property owner's yard. They were towing livestock trailers, which meant they were in town to capture buffalo. The next morning, Eric, Grace, and I woke extra early, ate a hasty breakfast in silence, and left the cabin an hour before sunrise. I parked by the Fir Ridge Cemetery. We stepped into our skis in the frosty dawn, followed the well-packed trail toward the park, reaching the top of Fir Ridge well before sunrise. I took 4 sweeping strides and shot off the ridge, plunging into the darkness below. My skis slid smoothly, humming in the icy tracks. I bent my knees and shifted my weight forward, flying down the hill, taking as much speed as I could for my glide across the valley. We skied onto a small bluff overlooking the trap and stood on the property line, watching the house and barn. A few minutes after we arrived, a light came on. Eric fumbled through his pack for a radio held it before his mouth, pressed the button, and said, "Backcountry to Perch, do you copy?" A voice came through. "This is Perch. See anything down there?" "Not yet," Eric replied. "Just got here. Porch light's on. We're waiting for the light to see our friends." While they were talking, Grace skied farther along the bluff. She came back a few minutes later and said she'd spotted them. "They're right next to his house," she said. They spotted them from the perch, too. "We have 16 of our friends practically sitting on the porch. DOL's up and about. Looks like it's now or never." "We better get going," Grace said. "It's almost light." Eric and I agreed. He waited on the bluff with the radio while she and I skied in. We pushed past a row of fence posts and skied beside the trap and into a grove of trees, the only cover we could find. Stopping at the edge, we surveyed the scene. Buffalo were bedded down on a small rise behind a fence, 15 feet from the front door. A mound of hay had been placed right next to the porch. "That's why they're liking it here so much," Grace said. Human shadows shifted in the house. "We better do it or we'll be caught in the daylight," I whispered. Grace nodded, and we went. Pushing with my poles and sprinting on my skis, I closed the distance to the house. This was the closest I'd ever been to buffalo, and I was amazed at their immensity. Giving them plenty of room and skiing to within 5 feet of the house, I pulled the mask over my face and passed before the sliding glass door. I wasn't afraid of being gored so much as I was of being arrested. For even as we woke the sleeping giants and coaxed them toward the park, I could feel they somehow sensed our intentions. I shouted at them, clacking my poles together and jumping up and down. The buffalo reacted, rising to their feet. Several of the bulls hopped a small fence and moved toward the park. Most trotted around it and ambled in the tracks of the leaders. I moved quickly, trying to stay close enough to keep them moving, but not too close. I didn't want them to double back around me. As we moved to the east with the buffalo, crossing the invisible park boundary, human voices called us from the property owner's yard. As the Department of Livestock agents realized too late what was going on. Because they don't ski and their snowmobiles are not allowed in the park's backcountry, they couldn't chase us. We didn't linger to heed their commands. We meandered slowly up the creek, giving the buffalo plenty of room. They lumbered through the heavy snow single file, the one in front breaking trail for those behind. We used the same technique, taking turns to break trail as we skied or snowshoed across the snow-covered meadows. As we skied on, I caught sight of a coyote across the valley. She eyed us as we made our way beside the creek. When we reached the sharp oxbow, the buffalo plunged over the bank, splashed across the channel, and hauled their bodies to the opposite side. The last 2 bulls turned slowly and stared at us before joining the others in a sheltered meadow where tufts of grass poked through the snow. We sat and watched them graze as the sun pulled itself free of the mountains in the park. I took my binoculars and trained them on the grazing bison. A huge bull, the largest of the group, nearly filled the field of vision. He buried his face and swung his head from side to side, nuzzling a crater in the snow, exposing a patch of last summer's grass. He lifted his broad, snow-covered face in my direction and chomped, a sheaf of grass hanging from his lips. Grace and Eric said they were getting cold and wanted to take a ski. I had a head full of thoughts and wasn't ready to leave the meadow. We made plans to meet by the graveyard in a couple of hours, and my friends skied away. My gaze moved easily from the backs of buffalo to the mountains in the park. Studying the rise and fall of peaks on a nearby ridge, I realized how much they resembled the bull's silhouette with its gently rising back, steep peaked hump, and valley of a neck. Rounded head. I stared back and forth, marveling at how perfectly the buffalo fit their surroundings and how well adapted they are at surviving Yellowstone's extremely difficult winters. Gradually, my thoughts drifted to the coming winter. I was supposed to leave in 2 days and return to my office internship in Missoula. Staring east into Yellowstone, I remembered the morning in the park, 5 years earlier when my mother had come to speak with me in a dream. Watching the buffalo graze against the backdrop of Yellowstone's mountains, I thought about how different the day might have turned out. I saw the 16 buffalo confined inside that trap. I remembered my mother's voice. "The path you are on is right. I am with you." Her words echoed in my head, dissolving any remaining doubt I may have had. I was not going back to Missoula. So one of the most important things that we do is capture the video footage of what's happening out there. By our being there, we're able to see and document and share with the world, everything that's happening to these animals. And this next short piece, it's only 4 minutes. I just want to show it because it brings the buffalo to life. And we asked John Trudell, who's a Native American poet and activist, and he saw this footage and he wrote the poem that you'll hear along with it. It's called Buffalo Wild. It may be a little difficult to watch, but I think it's very important that everybody sees it. That's what I was talking about.
Been living with a fugitive inside of us, like buffalo wild under a buffalo sun, running in and closing in, mad in the world, racing against the predators of spirit, in facing off with progress's addictions, civilized instructions, wanting habits, polite or violent, whatever it takes, with guns and laws and truth that lies. Domesticating the natural for harvest, threatened by what nature made free, with civilized rational aggressions, wreaking blood havoc. And no feeling of tomorrow or the ancient, in the plunderings of all our relations, the business of collateral damage, profiteering maximized in the carnage, running in and closing in, mad in the world, like buffalo wild under a buffalo sun. Sacred living reduced to looking to escape. Buffalo wild needing a buffalo roam between earth and stars, reading free, following the future through the looking glass. Ancestral prayers praying to the buffalo spirit, and living with its fugitive inside of us, feeling the human part, buffalo dreams, in the reality of all life is sacred, with buffalo medicine as one of the gifts.
So we need everybody here to get involved. That's, our campaign is a real grassroots effort, and we rely our video footage and the things we gain on patrol, the information and the things we see. If we weren't there and something happened, it would take 2 hours for the nearest news station to get out there and see it and tell the story. And the Department of Livestock and the other agencies involved in management would be the ones that got to tell the story. So our being there, our footage and the things that we gain out there end up fueling lawsuits and legislation and just all different kinds of efforts to protect the buffalo. We just had a big victory a couple weeks ago when our governor, one of the things the Department of Livestock has always claimed is that they have the right to trespass on any land if there's a buffalo on there, to chase those buffalo off. And our governor just took that right away from them a couple weeks ago. So this spring, for the first time, we got to see what the buffalo do when they're just left alone out there. There's one 800-acre parcel of land, and the landowners love having buffalo. They love seeing the calves born every spring. And so there was a group of 60 buffalo and 20 calves out there, and the calves got to be born and actually grow strong in that spot out there and drink their mother's milk, where their mothers ate really good, nutritious grass and not be chased. And then just a few days ago, that group just got up on its own and walked back into the park all on their own without any of that hazing. And it's very, very wasteful. And one of the other byproducts of hazing every spring, they try to come and push any buffalo that are in Montana back into the park, and it really doesn't make any sense. It costs thousands and thousands of dollars, millions of dollars. And you saw that one scene with the helicopter flying, and imagine such a sensitive ecosystem where there are grizzly bears and all kinds of birds, trumpeter swans and sandhill cranes and pelicans and all this wildlife, wolves, and you fly a helicopter over that ecosystem and it just disrupts everything. We see all kinds of wildlife just getting displaced when they're targeting the buffalo. And we were actually able to ground the helicopter for a while because, well, the buffalo aren't protected. The grizzly bears are protected under the ESA, and we had video footage documenting them disturbing grizzly bears, and so that the judge issued an order and they weren't allowed to fly the helicopter. They didn't actually have it out there hazing this spring. So we are making progress, but it's, when we started, to be honest, we all had this kind of real idealistic notion that, we'll be here 3-4 years, we'll show the world what's happening here, and then there's no way this can continue. But we've obviously had to readjust our vision and our view of that. But one thing I really want to stress is that if any of you ever want to come up to Yellowstone, we have an open cabin waiting there for you, and we have really amazing cooks, and we provide room and board. Thanks to Patagonia, we can outfit people in all of the best cutting-edge clothing to stay warm in that climate. And it's a really incredible experience to get to go out there and experience for yourself the buffalo. Most of the time it's real beautiful. The management isn't happening, but then it can change at any moment, and it can be very difficult to see. And if you can't make it out, we have a sign-up sheet in the back, and we send out, during the busy field season from November to June, we send out an email every week where we just kind of keep people up to date on the latest happenings on the boundary, so you can kind of see for yourself what's happening. And we have video footage that we share regularly. And if there are any decision makers or politicians who need to hear from us, the people, then we always include those so people can take action. And I'm going to open it up for questions now, but that's a basic overview of who we are, what we do, why the buffalo are so important to all of us. And I thank you all for taking the time to come out here, and I encourage you to get a book and read it. There's a lot of good information in there, not only about the buffalo, but kind of my own story and how I came to be out there. And so I really hope people have some questions.
Well, so the brucellosis story has been out there for quite a while, and it's really just a smokescreen. And have you figured out what is the real reason that they don't want the buffalo just on their own?
Yes, the question is, the brucellosis issue has been put out there a lot, and if it's really just a smokescreen, then what's really driving this issue? And that's really the purpose, like why I set about to research and write this, because I wanted to know that same question. And what I keep coming back to is that the real organized livestock industry, even some local ranchers in the area will tell you, I'm not worried about brucellosis, we're not going to get it from our buffalo, but it seems to be coming from the organized industry itself. And I think what it has to do with is this example of buffalo in Yellowstone re-inhabiting their former range on public lands, and people saying, why are buffalo the only species that we don't? We have elk here, we have grizzly bears, we have wolves, we have moose, but why are the buffalo not allowed to re-inhabit that range? And I think the livestock industry is afraid of competing with buffalo for grass that cattle eat, and they enjoy tremendous subsidies for public lands grazing, and they like Yellowstone to be that nice tidy box. It's okay if the buffalo stay there, but boy, don't let them come into Montana. What we see on that Horse Butte Peninsula where they come to give birth, the landowners who live there love the fact that they live in a place where they can see buffalo migrating through and they can see calves. And I think the livestock industry is afraid, they like to put these myths out there that we can't live with buffalo in our communities and there'll be a mess on the highways and they'll be eating our azaleas. But in reality, it's quite different, and I think they're afraid of people seeing that. And
it's something about losing their tax write-offs or something?
I think it just has to do with control and the way the livestock industry has always dealt with things that they feel threatened by. And also, I think it goes real back to deep-seated notions of the idea of progress. And I've heard, my great-grandfather, he killed the last buffalo from Montana, and that was a real step forward, and you're talking about letting them come out and do that again, it's just these real deep-seated things, and I honestly do believe that as a species we are able to figure out those few small problems that might exist. Even if there's a rancher who's afraid of his cattle coming in contact with wild buffalo, we could take a fraction of the millions of dollars that are being spent on this management plan and give that rancher a fence so he doesn't have to worry about that. And there are just, I think there are a lot of common sense solutions that are really being ignored.
Because I heard that there were just about as many ranchers in that area of Montana now that are really friendly, like you said, to the idea of the buffalo coming on to their land.
Yeah.
As there are that are anti the whole buffalo thing. And maybe more, even.
It's the ones that have...
Where's all this?
It's coming from Helena in our state capital and our legislature, which is under intense pressure from the more powerful part of the livestock industry. That's, one thing we were able to do is, it used to be where if a cattle herd in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem came down with brucellosis, the entire state's brucellosis-free status would be lost. But we had this idea about zone management. So if in the unlikely occurrence of a brucellosis transmission, it would only affect the zone around Yellowstone, and ranchers in eastern Montana wouldn't be affected. So their argument that the whole state's livestock industry was somehow at risk doesn't exist anymore at all either. And elk have transmitted the disease to cattle, but elk are not they don't meet a line like this when they try to come out of the park. So it's just a big contradiction. You had a question, ma'am?
Well, you pretty much answered it. The average landowner, the average citizen, likes the buffalo, wants them. So it's just the livestock ranchers, and they really have that much power.
They do,
more so than everybody else that lives in the state.
Yes, it's our number one industry, and our legislature is very friendly to their concerns. So one of the things we're we would like to see, if bison were given access to year-round habitat and they were allowed to stay on those national forest lands, we would probably support a hunt, and which would be a sustainable way to help manage the population, and it would also build constituency for the buffalo. The reason they don't target the elk is because there are so many elk hunters who would never allow that, But our work as a campaign is to build the constituency for the buffalo so that we can match the power that the livestock industry has. So they can't. There was a poll, and it's like an overwhelming majority of Montanans favor having free roaming buffalo in the state. But that there's still, one of the things we're going to be working on is we're going to take a bill to the legislature in January to take management away from the Department of Livestock and put it back with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks.
Yeah.
And
do you think there's a good chance that
we have some good support from legislators, and we're hopeful. But what our plan is to, if that doesn't pass, to use that as a real education campaign on the issue, and then take it to the voters through a citizens initiative following up on that. So we kind of have a long-term strategy around that.
Okay, thank you.
Yes?
Have you done any kind of online petitions, change.org or those kind of things? I've seen those gain support real quickly.
Yeah, we do have some of those, and we're going to be doing one of our former Interior Secretary, Bruce Babbitt. He was recently gave an interview, and he specifically mentioned Yellowstone National Park and the lands to the west that I've been talking about tonight as a prime candidate for a national monument to protect migratory wildlife. So that was an idea we've been kicking around as well, and we've been in touch with him, and we're going to be launching an effort to do that while President Obama is still in office, and that's one thing we're going to have is a change.org petition, because when those, as you know, get to a certain number of signatures, the White House promises they will look at your proposal. So, Will?
Dan, is there? I was intrigued by the fact that this was a genetically pure herd. So, is there a downside to releasing the animals where they might commingle with cattle? If there is how much of a downside is that?
They won't really mate with cattle. It's the way the genes, I guess, got tainted was through attempts to create beefalo over the years, which would be a stronger, hardier version of a cow. Because one of the things about buffalo is they evolved on this continent, and they're in tune, they can survive our climatic conditions, and so ranchers tried to get the characteristics from both species that they thought were the best. But now in bison ranching, and as far as I understand it, and you might be able to clarify, but I think there's a more of a movement to less intense management, like managing buffalo like cattle, but trying to let the buffalo figure things out on their own. And that at least some of the bison ranchers I've met and talked to definitely see the value in that. Justine?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I heard a bison geneticist speak, and he said that the wild bison genes are so strong and so capable that even if, let's say, we did allow buffalo to roam and re-inhabit, that in a very short period of time, he was saying like 150 years, you would actually see the bison genetics, the pure genetics, overtake any of the beefalo. And so, if we did allow the herds to grow, and then let's say they did begin to commingle with some of the ranch bison that have mixed genes, he was saying that the true bison genes are strong enough to actually convert, and we might, and in a very short period of time, geologically, 150 years, we would have strong and healthy buffalo again.
Well, Justine is talking, I just want to take a moment. She's one of our board members, and she lives here in the Boulder area. And so, she's always doing events and kind of is our Buffalo Field Campaign Colorado branch, she and her husband Roman. So just get to know her face, and hopefully you guys can kind of team up on some things in the valley here. Yes?
You kind of hit on it earlier, but I know back when they were looking at reintroducing wolves and they got pushed back from the livestock industry, Defenders of Wildlife started the compensation fund so that it removed any economic incentive to push back against the reintroduction. Has there been any thought of a private group like you guys coming up with something to compensate landowners or livestock owners if they lose a calf to brucellosis or something like that, where you just step in and say, here's your $800, go on by your business?
Not so much on that. One of the things that we have done as a campaign, if a landowner doesn't want buffalo on their land, instead of calling the Department of Livestock, they can call us, and we would go out and kind of, just try to get the buffalo to go on off of that property where they're not welcome, and they'll probably be killed if they call the other agencies. But as far as compensating like that, no, we haven't done that.
You should.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yes?
I was wondering, a few years ago I heard about an effort to kind of create an American Serengeti of sorts to kind of restore the plains, the American plains, and have them be like an international tourist attraction. And I guess those grasses are a remarkable carbon sink. And is anything still going along?
There's still some movement for things like that. In eastern Montana, there has been talk. Our Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks was working on a program where they were going to reintroduce buffalo to some places in eastern Montana, but the pushback from the livestock industry was so huge that they've basically retreated from that. But so it's, yeah, even though those bison that they were going to do it with had absolutely no chance of brucellosis at all, it was kind of telling, because it showed, all of a sudden it wasn't brucellosis, but it was these other things, and it really kind of showed that, that if it's not one thing, they'll find another.
Well, it was great to hear that story, at least some property owners, that they, creating some space for them.
Yeah, and that's the Horse Butte on the Horse Butte Peninsula, and that parcel had been a ranch before. Up till 2002, there were cattle on that land, but after 2002, there have not been any cattle on that entire peninsula. So there was no chance of anything, But so it really, as that's happened, it's really shown brucellosis for the myth that it really is. I think. I know we're kind of up against time here, so I'm going to be back there. If you guys want to get a book, I'd be happy to sign it for you and answer any questions on a one-on-one basis. And Justine back there can answer any questions you might have as well. And again, I really want to thank the Boulder Bookstore for having this event, and thank all of you for coming. It's been great.